Mr. Clark, you talked about it was either a community or your family's mill closed. Tell us a little bit about that mill closing and why it closed.
So it was a community mill in Escalante, and it closed around the 90s when you were talking about there was a lot of things that happened. And my personal experience, I spent a summer working for the Forest Service on a trail crew, and I remember having a conversation with the forester who was kind of over timber permits at that time. And I remember I definitely treated her like I assumed that she was, I'm definitely on the right side of the spectrum. I treated her like she was not on my side of the spectrum. And she stopped me one day, she said, look, I'm a forester. Like, I wanna have healthy forests. You've got to understand that that's what I'm going for. And so she and I had a conversation about the forest. And what would happen is a Utah-based environmental group would file a lawsuit every time they issued a timber permit. And it made it impossible for a lawmill or a sawmill in a pretty remote area to have what they needed to
So
get it done.
as a result of those lawsuits, that was a big part of why that mill had to close?
Yeah,
Yeah. Are there more mills in Utah today than there were 20 years ago?
definitely not.
Significantly less?
Significantly less.
You said something about you would want to change something in regards to judicial review. What is that specific item? I think you said it in your testimony. What is that item that you would like to see changed?
So we were the victims of an out-of-court settlement where had the Biden administration just defended or stepped away and let us defend an action, we would have been fine. But the environmental groups filed a lawsuit challenging something that the Trump administration had approved, and then there was an out-of-court settlement that wasn't based on anything important. And so what we need is more certainty. The sue and settle thing harms us.
So it was a sue and settle.
Yes.
And it's been used time after time, hasn't it, to stop projects, to stop proper management in the western states in particular. Is that right?
And in particular, projects that have gone through the whole process and have been green-lighted finally, and then they get this sue and settle that isn't based in the facts. It's just based on the politics.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Canterbury. Earlier, you had a number of questions from Representative Neguse, and he tried to get this committee to believe that the first thing you believe in is that there needs to be an increase in funding. They call it resources here in Washington, D.C. There needs to be more resources. That's called greenbacks by most people. Is it necessary to increase the budget by the Bureau of Land Management to get more money to you, or could there be money that could simply be redirected and get it to the ground in order to be able to get the permits that you need?
So if I may, and I'll try not to take too much time, if we just back up in history, when I used to walk into the agency office, there would be 3 people in the office that managed the entirety of the resources and the lands that are being managed today with 300 to 400 people. Those 3 people could talk to us and sit down and figure out what was the best. We cannot regulate conservation. Conservation comes from those of us that's on the land.
Yeah. So, in other words, if the dollars are spent appropriately, you can get the permitting process can be completed for grazers like yourself. Is that correct?
It can be completed. You can help simplify that permitting process.
Mr. Nyman, if we change regulations, would you rather have us change regulations and permitting, those type of things, or would you like the federal government to give you more money?
The first, for sure. Less regulation. I don't want more money. Businesses should stand on their own if it's given a fair chance. So regulation is helping destroy us.
How many families lost jobs as a result of the mill closures, that the reduction in some of your mills and the mill closures? How many families have lost jobs?
Directly related to us, along with the independent contractors, someplace between 150 and 200 families lost their jobs. If I go back to what happened in the 90s, I think it was like 26 or 30,000 jobs were lost. It was a huge amount.
26 or 30 to 30,000 jobs where?
That was throughout the West.
Throughout the West. And are Americans more likely to buy a 2x4 or you name whatever wood product? Are they more likely to buy that from an American company these days than they were 40 years ago?
I am seeing a strong trend to lean back to support buying American. Buy from the U.S. I'm feeling that.
Compared to 40 years ago, when you look at today, with the mill closures that we've had across the United States, are you more likely to buy a 2x4 that's been made in the United States today than you were 40 years ago when we had a lot more mills?
Yes.
We're more likely to have it 40 years ago that it might have been made in America. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And it would really be nice to get back to that time, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. I have a whole bunch more questions, but, you know, I listened to this from the ranking member, and he talked about Humboldt County out in California, and that, boy, things are just going to fall apart as a result of that. Are you completely dependent on the federal government? Is that what's being said here? When you hear a statement like that, I don't think anyone should want to be put in that position. And this conjecture that we may not be able to complete projects, let's see if those projects actually do not happen, because I can tell you the Trump administration is going to make sure that money gets to those frontline communities rather than funding that 400 people that it now takes to get a grazing permit out. Let's do it in an effective, efficient manner that reflects the wants and needs of the American people.